Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. Another long presidential election season is behind us. What started with signs of a political spring thaw after the pandemic, with White House hopefuls returning to the state, ended with voters turning out in record-setting numbers in New Hampshire to settle big races up and down the ballot. There is much to unpack, and here to help us do it is someone who was not on the ballot but still played a big role in the outcome, Governor Sununu. Governor, thanks for being here.
You bet, thank you.
So, Governor, what was the message the voters sent on Tuesday?
Listen to us. Listen to us. Don't talk about your issues as a bunch of politicians out of D.C. or a party type message. Listen to the things that the voters care about, and whether it's inflation or the border or public safety. Those things are what people want their elected leaders to address and to prioritize. If you try to force feed a different message, it's just people aren't dumb. They get it. They want to know that their leaders are listening. So I think that more than anything is why probably Republicans did so well here in the state.
The differences in the race to succeed you couldn't have been bigger, but the contest wasn't close. What swung so many swing voters to Kelly AI?
Well, likability. I mean, I don't want to say that Joyce wasn't likable, but Kelly really got out there and did the retail campaigning much stronger than the Democrats did, all across the state. I think the state senators did it on the Republican side better. I think the House members did it. And when you're making that connection, you're building relationships. Even if it's just for a few moments, you're building a relationship. You're making eye contact. You're taking the time to listen, and that makes you more likable and approachable. And that's what we want more than anything in New Hampshire government. That's how we differentiate ourselves. We're approachable. We're accessible. Most states don't have that. So if you're not being accessible and you're not getting out there, or you're just touting an other state campaign message or a national campaign message, it's just not going to connect with folks.
So a lot on the style side, but what is it, do you think, on policy the Republicans are plugged into right now with the electorate the Democrats just aren't?
Cost of living, right? What are the things that give people anxiety before they fall asleep at night in terms of what could be better? It's their cost of living, how they're going to make rent, how they're going to pay things, what's the national effect of this open border type stuff. As much as that's on the southern border, it's definitely having an impact with families here. Public safety, are we supporting law enforcement? Do they understand what we're trying to get as elected officials? So those are just the issues that connect with people in their homes, and so those are the issues that we need to express to them in terms of where we are, the debates we want to have, the discussion we want to have. Not that we come to you and say, here's all the solutions, we got all the answers. That's not it. Kelly went out there and said, okay, what's important to you? Here's some ideas I have. What do you think we should be doing? What are some of the, and that discussion is what built a lot of confidence, and that transparency, if you will, of the discussion builds the public trust with her.
Even though this outcome mirrors your prediction, were you a little surprised at how resounding it was?
Yeah, I mean, on Kelly's race, I mean, I always said she'd win by 3, 4, 5 points. An open race to be won by 8 or 9 points is just astounding, especially in this day and age. President Trump didn't do as well here, obviously. Did better than most people thought, but she even outpaced him by, 10+ points, which means she was making her own message. Not against Trump or anything like that, but she was making a message that was New Hampshire driven, about the live free or die state, why we're the gold standard. We're so proud of our successes, but it's management, not just taxes and big government, management that's going to keep bringing us those successes that we have in our communities.
Even as we talk about these big wins, there were another 2 losses in the congressional races yet again. What's landing in those state and local races that isn't connecting in those federal races?
Well, look, the federal races are hard because again, on the federal side, we have the shortest general election in the country. It's only a couple months. I've actually talked about moving the primary date. So those federal candidates can raise a lot of money if they've had the ability to do it. They don't, if they're not running in primaries. Maggie Goodlander, who I think is going to do a very good job. I have a lot of confidence there. I wish Lily Tang Williams had won. I really do. But I think Maggie will be okay. But obviously she had the advantage of all this money that had come in. Chris Pappas has raised a lot of money. That just makes it very hard to get your message out in a year where you have a presidential and a very hotly tested governor's race. So to kind of be a new candidate and break through with your message, they're great candidates with a great message, but to break through and get people to really embrace it and understand it and spend the time on it was just a little harder.
The warnings from Democrats were so stark, so dire about the future of this country and democracy being at stake. Does the Trump administration now have a little bit more leeway to execute on a conservative agenda as long as it doesn't veer off into extremism or distraction?
I think the key for the Trump administration isn't just a conservative agenda, it's getting something done. So I go back to 2017 and 2018. Trump had just been elected. He had the House and Senate. They didn't pass a whole lot of legislation that they could have and should have done. They could have done immigration reform, and they missed the opportunity. They could have done health care reform. They missed the opportunity. I'm hoping that they've learned their lesson. So it's not just a conservative agenda, it's getting something done, moving the ball across the line. And I think what you're going to have is folks, because the House is so closely divided and the Senate has some real, I think, thinkers in there, some real smart folks in there that aren't just, extremists, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that kind of moderate, finding the middle ground and moving forward. So I think the second term is going to be a heck of a lot better than the first. I think he's going to, I used to not think he'd be able to build a great team around him. I think he is this time. I think his choice for chief of staff already is phenomenal. I think Susie's going to do a great job of filtering what needs to come to him and being able to control the message. Just wasn't done very well in the first term. So I have a lot of faith and confidence, but they got to deliver. That
was a big part of your criticism in the First in the Nation primary, was that he didn't have the discipline to get it done. What do you think has changed that gives you a little bit more confidence?
I don't know. I don't know whether it's, I don't want to say he's slowing down, but I think he's a little more measured than he was before, right? I mean, a lot of the criticism that folks started just railing against Trump in the last few weeks was the same criticism we had heard for years, right? So it wasn't necessarily new stuff, but he himself, I think, is a little more measured. He's built a much more professional team around him. He didn't really have that in the first term. He knows what he's walking into. He didn't really know what he was walking into necessarily in the first term. And especially with J.D. Vance as the vice president, a actual sitting U.S. senator who knows that legislative process, who's built those relationships. Conservative guy, but he's got great relationships and he's very cordial and he's made a lot of friends across the aisle. I think that's going to be a huge asset to him to get stuff done out of the Capitol.
The Constitution says this is going to be it for President Trump. So in a weird way, we're going to have to start another conversation about the next nominee.
That's great.
Sooner rather than later, right? So how do you think that's going to unfold with this unique situation of Trump in the White House, but then Republicans already having to look towards their next nominee in 28?
My sense is it'll be similar to this time around where, again, it'll be a little bit delayed, but in the next probably 18 months from now, you'll have both Republicans and Democrats really coming out of the woodwork trying to figure out who's going to be the nominee. The Democrats have a much bigger problem because as a party, I've always said, both parties have their troubles, but Democrats have a DNA problem. They have a generational problem. They're really getting torn apart, especially after this election. And I hope they just listen. I'm not, again, just for the sake of the American people, it can't just be all negativity. It can't just be all extreme, and you can't just be about nothing. Your message can't be, I'm not that person. That's not a winning message. You got to be hopeful and about something and drive forward. As much as you might disagree with Trump, he at least said, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to change this, and I'm going to do this. The Democrat Party didn't. So I hope they kind of learn from that, listen to the American people, but they have a lot of work to do on their side to figure out who they are before they start throwing candidates at the wall.
Do you think President Trump will allow the spotlight to move to New Hampshire and a new nominee, even as he's president?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we've always been in the spotlight. It's coming here. The question is, hopefully the Democrats have smartened up, and I think they have. You try to skip New Hampshire, you do it at your own peril. And never before was that more clear than what just happened with the fact that because Biden refused to allow himself to be challenged early on, they got into this big mess in August, and he was effectively pushed out, and that obviously had its repercussions all the way into November. So the smart move is Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. These are the early states. Do as best you can to filter that field down and then use the rest of the country in their primary system to make sure the voters decide. It's the way it was designed to be done, tried and true. It works really well, and we'll see everyone here in a few years.
Right, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do think this process will probably start earlier than we've ever seen before because that's been the trend. What role do you see yourself playing in the First in the Nation process as a private citizen?
Yeah, well, look, I love New Hampshire. I love our process. I think we're really the best at it. So whatever I can do to help make sure that all these new candidates have an even playing field. They're getting around and meeting everybody. They're doing it the right way. They understand the value of retail politics. I think I did that pretty darn well through this Republican primary process. Obviously got behind Nikki. Fell a little short, but that's okay. We forced the process to happen. We didn't just coronate somebody. That's the value there. So as much as I can be a help to anyone or the entire party, just making sure that people understand what New Hampshire's all about, how to do it right, how to put the citizens first, I'll be there for it.
All right, Governor, thanks for joining us on CloseUp.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Stay with us. Right after the break, we'll bring in Congressman Chris Pappas, who just won his 4th election in the 1st District.